Hello and welcome to the February 2019 edition of Conversations with Conservatives. We're a group of free market and liberty-minded members of Congress who are here joining us to talk about the top issues of the day. My name is Rob Bluey from the Heritage Foundation, and I'll be keeping an eye on social media to see what questions you have for them. Use the hashtag CWC116 on Twitter or tweet us at Conversations to ask a question. Today we're joined by Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So last night you had a front row seat for the State of the Union. Tell us what your reactions were from sitting inside the House chamber.
I felt that at least half the room was filled with energy, and that was pretty good. And I thought President Trump did a really good job laying out the case of where we've been, what we've accomplished with regard to the economy. I really liked a couple of things that he talked about, specifically that we're not a socialist nation. When he went that way, and it reminded Americans of who we are and why we're, how we became the envy of the world for freedom and economic activity, and yet it also pointed the sharp distinction, even within the Democrat Party, of the radical left socialist that they have there. And I thought that was an excellent move, and I would just say that I think his plea for unity was I fell on deaf ears, but I think he did a nice job making that case.
Congressman Davidson?
Yeah, I think he led with his strong suit as the economy. I mean, it's truly historic. It's great for everyone. Our economy is really flourishing under policies that Republicans have long said it would flourish under. You know, when you get regulatory relief and certainty, and you get tax reform that encourages and incentivizes the creative part of our economy, creating and innovating and doing it here in America instead of offshore. You're not talking about corporate inversions anymore. You're talking about people repatriating billions and billions of dollars of cash because it's rational now under a reformed tax code. So that was great. It was great to see the president talk about ending infanticide and being very clear again that we're not going to support that trend that's emerging from the far left. And then I think it was really nice to hear the president talk about really great nations don't fight endless wars.
I want to delve in deeper on a couple of the issues that you raised. The president said clearly, and I quote, "America will never be a socialist country." Was it surprising that you saw so many Democrats remain seated when he made that comment, when many of you rose?
Was it surprising? No. The reason is I think that there's a kind of a socialist bent in the Democrat Party anyway. So the idea of big government, where big government taxes you, which means there's a way to think of taxes. They are compulsorily taking from you. They're forcing from you your income, your property, whatever it is, and then they're redistributing it to somebody else. Some people would say that is a classical definition of socialism. So it's already there. It's just now you have some people who are actually openly saying we're socialists. I'm in the socialist wing. And so it didn't surprise me that people sat on their hands, except for the Republicans. And I think there were some Democrats who actually stood up for that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they were divided. But, the idea, you go back to the Reagan quote, freedom's never more than one generation away from extinction. I think that illustrated. I mean, I was in Germany in 1989 when the wall came down. Literally met people experiencing their first hours of freedom. The idea that I would ever be in Congress, well, that would have surprised me. So I couldn't have imagined that in its own right. But even a bigger shock would be that somehow our country, in my lifetime, not even, in my 40s now, see people actually embracing socialism, an idea that's failed everywhere it's been tried in every variation. And people say, well, that's a different kind of socialism. That's what they all say. I mean, Hugo Chavez didn't presumably intend to bankrupt his country. It's the depravity of the ideology that bankrupts countries.
I want to go back to some of the policies that we're now seeing introduced in the House, but I want to ask first about another phrase. Congressman Davidson, you raised this, on infanticide. The president made a clear case for the sanctity of human life, and it just came days after Senate Democrats blocked a measure that would have protected babies who are born after a botched abortion. Again, an issue that showed a stark contrast between conservatives and liberals on this issue. Your reactions to his comments?
I mean, you're talking post-term abortions. I mean, this is, you can dress it up how this is killing babies. It's no longer attached to mom at all. The baby breathing oxygen, every definition, it's already passed through the magic birth canal that converts it from fetal tissue to a human being in the far left ideology. So I think we absolutely have to get fourth-term abortions ended, and we have to go much further, in my opinion. I think we should at least get to the heartbeat bill.
Yeah, and I agree with Warren. The heartbeat bill is where we need to begin. But I mean, I don't think we should be surprised at how radical the left, the Democrats, have come. I mean, this is something from Peter Singer, who is an Ivy League philosopher who's got some kind of a following. But he said that the rational next step from abortion is infanticide. I mean, so I don't think we can really say we're surprised at it. We can be outraged at it, which I think most of America really is. But I was glad the president stood up for that. But I'm with Warren. We need to go much, much further to protect the unborn.
Based on what you heard last night, what do you see as the legislative agenda here that Republicans and conservatives should be pursuing in Congress?
I think I think was sincere and genuine in desiring that the country would work together, that we could pursue greatness instead of gridlock. I don't think those were just cliches. I think he really wants that to happen. And I think even the most divisive issue of the moment, which is securing our border, he has compromised. I mean, when you remember back to the campaign, he was talking about a big, beautiful wall from sea to shining sea, 40 foot high, but with a door, right? I mean, he's backed way off of that. He's not even asking for all of the 17 priority areas that Homeland Security wants to secure. He's compromised and say, let's do the top 10. We'll do 10 of the 17 priority areas Border Patrol wants. So that seems like a compromise, right? And so then you say, well, maybe we're in the realm of, 7 priority areas, 8 priority areas instead of 10. That would be a rational negotiation involving compromise. But the Democrats have held at 0. And I think he could have done a little better job verbalizing how much he's been willing to move and how little they have. He really put the bonus on them. They haven't moved.
Right, and I agree with that. I mean, look, when you consider that he was asking just a few months ago for $25 billion, and now we're talking $5.7 billion, and I think he's willing to drop down a little bit to that, to Warren's point of going to just a few select areas. And we're not talking right now any more than a net effective about 115 miles of wall, because he wants to double fence to about 234 miles of fence. That's what he's asking for. I think he's made incredible compromises. I think he needs to lay the case out there, and I think he needs to make the argument on why the Democrats have become so locked in. It's no longer, quite frankly, about policy. This is about politics and actually their animus towards this particular president. And I think that's important to point out constantly, over and over again. We need the fence. We need it. For those of us who live down in Arizona or on other borders, we need that. And I think that there's so much to be said about the issue, and hopefully he'll keep driving that issue.
Well, Congressman Biggs, you see the issue up close in Arizona, obviously a border state. Want to ask you a question that comes from Sarah Ferris with Politico. And by the way, before I ask that question, I'll just remind our viewers that you can ask a question by tweeting to @conversations on Twitter or using the hashtag CWC116. Sarah Ferris of Politico asks whether there is any concern that a national emergency, which the president didn't declare in the speech last night, to build the wall would get caught up in the courts and maybe get ultimately blocked. What's your view on this, Congressman Biggs?
Well, let's talk about a couple things. Number one, he has the authority, and it's not unique. We know that, for instance, there's been almost 60 in the last 25, 30 years. There's been almost 60 emergency declarations by presidents, and I think the number is 30 some odd that are still in force. President Obama even used it to declare swine flu as a national emergency. So this is not without precedent, number one. Number two, what you see on the border really is a crisis, and it is worsening. Just talked to Border Patrol agents yesterday, and today they tell me it's actually worsening. The amount of drugs that's coming across, the human problem, the humanitarian problem, as well as the human souls that are sneaking into the country. So I think he's got the authority. I think, I'm not going to speak for Warren, but I know I'm always leery about seeing the executive take action when I would prefer that it be legislative, but actually Congress has delegated this authority to the president. Title 10, Section 284, says if there's an active drug trafficking corridor, it isn't even the president. The Secretary of Defense could go in and say, we're going to build fences, walls, roads, other infrastructure, lighting. That's really what we're getting at. And I think that, I don't think we're going to see Congress come together. And just think of this. We're apprehending, according to the agents I was talking to today, we're apprehending about 2,000 people a day at the border. They think they're getting maybe half of the people coming in. They're only getting 15% of the drugs that are coming in. Now, if we wait another 10 days, that's another 20,000 people that we're going to get into this country, and who knows how many more drugs you're going to see coming in across the country. I think it's time to do something.
Yeah, I'd just like to draw a distinction. I mean, so 10 U.S.C. 274 and 284 are in statute, so they don't require an emergency declaration. Right. I think the president could do that. It's already in statute. It doesn't require an emergency declaration. My own view is that emergency declarations should be rare. They should be when Congress can't convene, and you should move with a greater sense of urgency than is possible due to the legislative calendar, for example. If you look at, after 9/11, I think it would be very clear that there was a sense of emergency, and George Bush didn't launch strikes immediately after 9/11. Congress convened 3 days later and authorized combat. Frankly, we're still on that, but which shows you should take time to think through it. But the reality is, when it's an emergency, it's clear it's an emergency. Here, I don't think we've built a consensus that everyone sees that it's an emergency, and I think for that reason, it'll do exactly what emergencies are supposed to not do, which is get bogged down in court. It's supposed to be that the country goes, yeah, that's an emergency, we got to do that. And I don't think there's a path that this wouldn't get bogged down in the courts. I think there's no way it could get bogged down in the courts if he uses 10 U.S.C. 274, 284, because they're clear in statute.
Yeah, can I just dovetail on that for a second? I think Warren's right. I think that's why I mentioned 284. I think that's the cleanest way to do this. I think that there's going to be lawsuits brought, and I would suggest that even if Congress were to pass a piece of legislation, I guarantee you that there'll be lawsuits brought to enjoin enforcement. So it isn't even the mechanism that's used, whether it's Congress, an emergency declaration, or 10 U.S.C. 284. It is ultimately that the NGOs, the pro-open borders wing of the Democratic Party, they are going to bring a lawsuit regardless of how we get it done.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And when you look at the situation, who's winning with the status quo? I mean, the cartels. The cartels love the status quo. They're making billions of dollars every year on drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking. And meanwhile, the people in Central America and Mexico are fleeing the cartels. And then they charge for the fee of smuggling them. Meanwhile, they exploit the people that they're charged with safe passage to the U.S. A third of them are women and girls are raped, and many of the people in that find themselves in trafficking, whether it's for labor, sex, or any number of other things. So the cartels own the black market at the border, and if we think that the caravans are somehow passing up through there without paying the toll, I think we really need to look harder at the illicit finance angle on this.
Well, of course, members of Congress do have an opportunity with this conference committee that's been set up after the government shutdown was ended. But the time is running short. There's only so many days. February 15th is the next deadline. What are your expectations? Are you hopeful that this conference committee will come present the president with something that he might consider signing, or are you pessimistic about what it could turn into?
Well, I think my view is that they're not going to produce anything that the president will sign. That's my personal view, which means that we'll either be stuck looking at another 2-week, 3-week short-term spending bill of CR, or quite frankly, the president's going to have to come in and encourage his Secretary of Defense to take that action, because I just don't think we're going to see a legislative fix out of this anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful, but the reality is we've been given little cause for hope from Speaker Pelosi. I mean, she's outright said we're not doing that, and so we'll see whether there are people in her party that are a part of the conference committee that are willing to, frankly, defy Speaker Pelosi. We saw last night they've pretty well followed commands. When she said sit down, they sat down. When she said stand up, they stood up. When she said be quiet, they were quiet. And we'll see whether the conferees actually act on their own accord and represent their districts instead of Speaker Pelosi. I think lastly, you're right, 10 USC he could do, and I think he should do that even ahead of February 15th. I mean, he should do that today. I was hoping he'd do it last night because irregardless of whether we spend 5.7, you could use DOD to do this. We're already moving troops there. And I'd say the last thing, the president should be patient. He will win on this. He should simply say, we're not going to move forward on any spending until we resolve this. And we know from everything that the Democrats have already put on the floor, they want to spend more money and they want to change the terms and conditions. And so I think he'll win if he's patient.
As you talk to your own constituents, how do you talk about this issue of border security, and what is their reaction to both the president's comments and the situation that we're seeing here in Washington?
I mean, he largely, incredibly popular in the 8th District of Ohio. We've, 2-to-1, better than 2-to-1 feedback to support the president, even during the shutdown. People were sad about the shutdown. No one really supported the shutdown as a tactic. I didn't support it. My view is we should have done 2-year CR that said, hey, the whole rest of the presidency, I'm not one to shut the government down, but we're just not going to fund anything else until we get this done. My hope is we could still do that, and we can do it 3 weeks at a time or the whole rest of the administration, and I think that would be a win because ultimately the most bipartisan thing on Capitol Hill is apparently bankrupting the country. The desire to spend money is voracious, and it's on both sides. So I think if he leverages that, he can win.
Yeah. And I would say that in my district, there's really strong support for building that wall. There's strong support for doing other mechanisms, whether it's asylum, reworking the asylum laws, but they want the border wall, and that's where we are. And I'm like Warren. I think that at some point the president's going to have to do a couple things to take it off the table. Either do a long-term CR, so where no one can come out, or just say we're just going to do CRs every 2-3 weeks, whatever. But we're not moving forward till we've taken care of this issue. And my own belief is, if we believe it's an emergency and a crisis, we ought to handle it and treat it like it is the emergency and crisis we see it.
Members of Congress often make a statement in who they bring as a guest to the State of the Union. Can you share with our listeners who you brought?
I brought Art Del Cueto, who is the vice chairman of the National Border Patrol Association, and he's in Arizona. He's worked the border in Arizona, and he just led, when I took 8 congressmen down to the border 2 weeks ago, he spent some time taking us to different sites, including a place which 5 days after we left, the Border Patrol rounded up 70 illegal aliens crossing the very port, not port, but the very part of the non-fence we were at.
I brought Chief Rodney Muterspaw from Middletown. He's chief of police in Middletown. And there's no international border between Middletown and California or Arizona. And Middletown's been hard hit by the opioid crisis. Chief has led a great response, engaged the entire community in that, is definitely reorienting some of that work to do positive things throughout the community and making the most out of it. Great policing effort, community-wide support, and a lot of desire to focus on human trafficking, another cartel business. And so it just highlights, as I spoke with him, the importance of dealing with who's actually driving this, and it's transnational groups exploiting our border and the broken laws that facilitate the status quo.
Let's talk about some issues here in the House. The House Oversight Committee is having a hearing on H.R. 1, which would make significant changes to voting rights and campaign finance law. What are your thoughts on this legislation? It seems to be, given its name, H.R. 1, a top priority of House Democrats.
Yeah, it's called the Democratic Majority Bill, I think, which is really all it's about is whatever it takes to help them. I mean, you could call it the Soros Fund Act or something else. I mean, this is a complete restriction on free speech in America. It's a destruction of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It frankly destroys the concept of citizenship and helps facilitate illegal voting. No accountability for voting. We should be working on voter identity. And frankly, one of the big reforms we should be working on is citizenship. We talk about it at the census. People don't really want to get there, but the reality is states like California have 3 to 5 extra members of Congress because they count total population for apportionment. And we should only count citizens for apportionment. And of course, Democrats are also working to restrict every way possible to do a census that draws that distinction.
Yeah, and I would say it's important to understand that there's really only two lines between an absolute nationalization of our government and the old idea of federalism. And those two lines are the Electoral College, which there is a concerted effort to try to attack. But in H.R. 1, the dividing up of these districts that Warren was just talking about, the apportionment process, well, they're going to take that away from the states. They want to remove that from the states so that, for instance, Arizona does our districting by an independent redistricting commission. Our commission was voted on and created by the voters of Arizona. They will take that away, and it's going to come to some non-elected judges right here in the District of Columbia who will design those districts. And if you think those districts are going to work to make things either fairer or on behalf of the Republicans, then you're sadly mistaken. It's going to be designed to increase the number of Democrats in Congress.
We talked about socialism earlier, and some of your colleagues here in the House are pushing proposals like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. We might actually see them perhaps come on to the House floor for a vote. It seems that they're making their way through committees. What message do you have for conservatives as they counter some of these quite radical proposals that would transform our country?
Well, I think the message I would have is probably two or three things. Number one, it's incumbent on conservatives in Congress to use every avenue that we have to try to slow these down and maybe blow them up before they get to the floor. And when I say that, I mean, there's some procedural avenues that we can use. But the second thing is, it is critical that the voters of America who really care about these things be vigilant, that they participate. I mean, what you guys are doing at Heritage, I know what Warren does with outreach, what Freedom Caucus does with outreach, what we do with outreach. We need to hear from them, but they also need to let others hear, the people in the Republican conference, and maybe in some of these areas where it was close. I think of Dave Bratzel district, which I think is Virginia 6, and I think Virginia 5. Some of these close districts that we might have won or lost. It is important that they let whoever's sitting there know that they're watching, that they're concerned, and that they're going to be voting based on how some of these bills turn out.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. I mean, the reality is, unfortunately, we lost control of the House. People can analyze why, but the reality is, one of the pieces of analysis, only about 80,000 votes decided who has the majority. Only about 80,000 across the entire country. So take the bigger split across. If we had 80,000 flipped in the right districts, we would still have control of the House. So everyone's participation and engagement really does matter. And you go back to the founding. I mean, what did Ben Franklin say coming out of the Constitutional Convention? A republic, if you can keep it. If who can keep it? The Congress? No, they hadn't even started meeting yet. He's talking to the people. If the people can keep it, and they're only going to keep it, frankly, we're going to get the government that our people tolerate. So our people have to say, we're not going to tolerate that. Just like, that's why it was such a good marker that the president threw down that says, we were born free and we will stay free. America will never be a socialist country.
That's right. Well, working class voters were so critical to President Trump's election in 2016. As conservatives, how are you reaching out to them, and what message do you have to them that would make them vote for a conservative in Congress or the White House?
Well, just prior to coming to Congress, I mean, I owned a group of manufacturing companies. We had plenty of blue collar workers there, and they're small mid-market companies. I mean, I'm heavily involved day to day in the shop floor of some aspect of the business for 15 years prior to coming here. So you look like trade policy. I experienced bad trade policy firsthand. And American workers, particularly in manufacturing, were disgusted with the way that our trade policy was handled. Donald Trump didn't just talk about it, he's been about it. He came to office, he's been very serious about fixing our broken trade deals, and he's actually delivered on wins on that. You look at 600,000 new manufacturing jobs in the U.S., largely blue-collar jobs, some of them white-collar jobs, some of them in R&D, but the entire economy benefits from these wins. And so it's just another thing. Deeds, not words. The president's delivered on the deeds.
Yeah, and I think it's our job as members of Congress to get out, which I do in my district, and talk to business owners and manufacturers and really try to get what they're coming at. And the problem that we have, and I think what President Trump was emphasizing last night, is we're going to have to play some defense here, because I think our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like to stomp on some of the tax reform. They would like to roll back some of the regulatory reforms we've done. I think they would like to, they've said they would like to increase taxes instead. including estate tax, which will penalize small businesses and small family concerns. So we've got it, again, it's outreach, it's communication, it's doing all that we can to get the message out, because that's, our message is the right message. If you like freedom, if you like prosperity, that's our message. Our message simply sometimes gets obscured because we don't talk about, I could start talking about Steve Utze, who wants to bring back 600 jobs to my district, but the tax policy doesn't work for him. But he can't keep his manufacturing plant in China. He doesn't want to keep it there. He wants to bring it back. We need to talk about individuals and their lives, and we don't do that enough. We're great at numbers and logic.
I'd say one other thing on that. When you look at markets, we need to make markets work. And the core of the socialist idea is we don't need markets, we just need smart central planners. And the reality is markets work. And we have markets that are broken in the United States. The healthcare market is non-functioning. It's heavily distorted by subsidies and price controls from the federal government. And so as we look at making healthcare more affordable, including prescription drugs, the approach that we do, including with the administration's leadership on prescription drug pricing, for example, is important. We need to do it in a way that really makes markets work, that does protect intellectual property rights. Because when we make markets work, instead of just distorting it with new subsidies, then we're doing what actually made America great in the first place. You can get tempted to say, oh, but we're winning by just doing this federal subsidy or things like that, but that's a very short-sighted approach, and of course, Bastiat covered that with what's seen versus what's not seen. And it's a little three-card Monte thing here. So we need to make the healthcare markets work. We need to make the labor markets work. We don't make labor markets work by federal minimum wages or mandatory caps on hours worked for overtime, or every person shall buy this product even if it's defective policies. We need to make the markets work. And for many of our markets, we have some non-functioning activity that would be nice to see even the Justice Department engage in.
Well, I appreciate that answer. And Congressman Biggs, I'd like to take you up and hear more about that story. I agree with you. It's so critically important that conservatives tell stories and in personal terms. Yes, focusing on the facts and the logic is important, but it's one of the reasons we created the Daily Signal at Heritage, to get those types of stories out there, because frankly, the left tends to do a better job of it, even though the truth isn't on their side many times.
Right. So here's another example. I was at an opening of a fast food restaurant, and this guy basically has created created, I think it's like 500, 600 jobs in Arizona by opening up a series of these fast food restaurants. But when we start talking about mandatory minimum wage, they're talking 15, 20, 25 bucks an hour. These restaurant chains are now already going to these kiosk type of ordering mechanisms so they can let go of people. And they're developing robotics to do some of the cooking. You will see almost 2/3 of the labor force drop out as you raise the minimum wage. And I started working at a fast food restaurant when I was a kid. I needed that job. And I won't tell you how old I am, but the minimum wage was $2.10 an hour when I was a kid. So,
yeah, and you look at those stories, we heard them all the time during the healthcare debate. People that found themselves needing to work 2 part-time jobs, and you look at the service sector, that happened to a lot of people because, well, Obamacare had a mandate that said if you work more than this many hours, your employer shall offer X, Y, Z. But you had businesses in the service sector that had really built their entire business model at that point on having a program where they didn't offer some benefits that other industries did. And so, that's a motivator for some people to switch out of that sector to another sector. But it had worked for a number of people. They had their own insurance programs and were buying in the individual market. Obamacare was supposed to fix that, but the reality is with some of the heavy-handed price control mandate policies like shall offer, everyone has to do it this way, people found themselves not able to get the same kind of hours or have the same stability in the workforce.
Congressman, I want to thank you both for joining us today. Do you have any closing words you want to share with our listeners?
Well, we just can't give up. It's time for us to stand up and lead, and that's why I like working with Warren, and I like working with Heritage, I like working with the Freedom Caucus. We've got great people who are trying to get stuff done, and that's what we have to do, just keep fighting.
Absolutely. There's no substitute for victory. The stakes couldn't be higher. We've got a republic to keep.
Right.
Congressman Warren Davidson, Congressman Andy Biggs, thanks so much for joining Conversations with Conservatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.